How's it going, people? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to the top 5 cheap substitutes for expensive cars that you can buy for under £20,000. I've done a video like this in the past, and what I did is basically create a formula by which an expensive car and a cheap car can be compared to basically make an unbiased list to an extent. The way I did that was by looking at the difference between the 0 to 60s of the two cars and the brake horsepowers of the two cars, and then kind of adding them together, and whichever car had the lowest value basically won, really. If you want to see the full formula, click the link on the top right hand side of the screen and that should explain everything. But anyway, the purpose of this video isn't to give you 5 cars that are exactly perfect one-for-one matches with much more expensive cars. Instead, it's trying to give you 5 cars that you could really gain a lot of enjoyment out of that serve a similar-ish purpose to their far more expensive counterparts. So if there's a supercar, there's a sports car, if there's a hot hatch, there's a warm hatch, that kind of thing basically. As always, remember that I make these videos from the UK market perspective, so prices in other countries may differ, and remember also that whenever you're buying any second-hand car, maintenance, repairs, tax and insurance are super important to remember, but I'll try and touch on them a little bit throughout this video. If you enjoy the video, remember to like, comment and subscribe, but without further ado, let's get into the video. Starting us off at number 5 with 693 points, we have a substitute for the Mercedes-Benz G63 AMG, which starts at over £140,000 brand new. This super popular four-wheel drive beast packs a 4-litre V8 bi-turbo engine that puts out 577 brake horsepower, taking it from 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds. Not that any of those figures will be particularly relevant to you as you'll be wafting around Sloane Street in London doing under 15 miles per hour. I would say the key features that make the G-Wagon so special include, of course, the iconic shape that has lasted for generations, the mass following and love for it, and its usability both on the road and off it. It is for these reasons that the car I believe acts as the best substitute for it for less than 20 grand is in fact from a completely different manufacturer. Though often there are camps on either side of this 4x4 debate, the Land Rover Defender, in both its 110 and 90 variants, which most notably translates to 4-door and 2-door, shares similar features with the G-Wagon and can be had for well under 10 grand for older high mileage examples. 20 grand will get you a 2011 model with around 70,000 miles on the clock. It's important to note that you can actually get an old G-Wagon for under 20 grand, but you won't get one quite as new as a Defender. The 2011 model came in before the engine change in 2012 and hosts a turbo diesel 2.4 litre inline-4 that puts out 120 brake horsepower and does 0 to 60 in an incredible 15.9 seconds or thereabouts, depending on whether you get a 90 or a 110. Land Rover don't like to publicise the 0 to 60 on the Defender too much, it would appear. To be fair, both are still quicker than my Polo, not that I'm salty or anything. Though the Defender and G-Wagon are two completely different beasts with their own rightful places in 4x4 history, they are similar in that they are both iconic 4x4s, both turn heads, both have significant fan bases behind them, and both have had long-standing shapes that haven't really changed too much. Let's ignore the potential new 2019 Defender when we say that, of course. But let's stop gushing about these two beasts and look into the Defender a little more. It was developed from the original Land Rover series that launched in 1948 and was first introduced as the Land Rover 90 and 110. When in 1989 a third model was brought out by Land Rover, the Discovery, Land Rover decided to rename it the Defender 90 or 110 in 1991 to avoid confusion. In terms of ownership and reliability, the 2.4 litre Puma engine is renowned for heating issues, and some of the earlier ones were known for engine failures due to an oil channel valve blocking up. You can probably tell this is happening as you'll hear a distinct knocking noise from the engine. According to owners, it can sometimes kangaroo or lurch when driving at low speeds, and some have mentioned the clutch is going quite early and needing replacing. Problems outside of the engine include leaking body panels, which can result in wet, smelly carpets, accelerated corrosion, and a rusting chassis, so be aware of this and check when it comes to any purchase. Overall, I think the Defender is an iconic British 4x4 that of course doesn't tick the boxes of a G63 in any way, and isn't comparable in terms of out-and-out performance, but as a concept, you can draw parallels between the two, so for 1/7 of the price, your quid's in. Coming in at number 4 with 581 points, we have a substitute for the Chevrolet Corvette C7 ZR1, a massive American muscle-cum supercar with a 6.2 litre supercharged V8 that puts out 755 brake horsepower, taking it from 0 to 60 in a claimed 2.8 seconds. Mind-bending specs for this kind of beast. You actually can't buy one in the UK, but in the US they start at around $120,000 brand new. Of course, there are plenty of less savage versions of the C7 that you can buy in the UK, but as I mentioned at the start, I'm looking at the best each car has to offer, and the ZR1 certainly is that package for Corvette, considering it's rumoured that the car's unofficial Nürburgring lap time is 6 minutes and 57 seconds. You won't quite lap the ring in that kind of time in the substitute I'm proposing, but you will still get a large-engined, rear-wheel drive American muscle car and a Corvette badge. I'm talking about an earlier generation of the car, the Chevrolet Corvette C5, which hosts the infamous LS1 engine, a 5.7 litre V8 that puts out 344 brake horsepower, taking it from 0 to 60 in a very decent 4.5 seconds. The C5 is the 5th generation of Corvette, and deviated somewhat from the previous generation that had slightly more curved features rather than boxy ones. Though it was originally criticised for using cheap materials, it turned out that these materials were surprisingly strong and lightweight, so the C5 has actually been regarded as having a far better overall build quality than the C4, which had a lot of squeaks and rattles, with owners suggesting the car actually feels quite cheap for a supposedly luxury vehicle. When the C5 was built, it was meant to compete with cars like the Aston Martin DB7 and Ferrari 355, which is probably why it has a better build quality and a comparable 0 to 60 time. You can pick up a C5 for as little as £14,000, but 20 grand will get you a decent example with around 70,000 miles on the clock. Not bad for this import. For those of you in the UK, remember this will come as a left-hand drive, so be aware if you're going for a manual, which I highly suggest you do, not only for the enjoyment, but because the auto is 0.4 of a second slower from 0 to 60. In terms of reliability, the LS1 is actually a surprisingly solid block, and has great tuning potential, as you may well be aware already. Swapping heads, cam and intake can bring the car up to around 500 brake horsepower with little effort, and there are some decent supercharger upgrades. Be careful of the electrics though, as some owners have mentioned grounding issues. In the US it would be wise to find one that hasn't been too heavily modified, but as they are quite rare in the UK, that shouldn't be too much of an issue here. Some owners note one key issue with the C5, lack of throttle control, as many have ended up in bushes or walls, so check for any potential signs of the car being crashed in its past life. So, a big American beast is a substitute for a big American monster. It's not going to offer you the performance of a C7 ZR1, but it's not that far off some of the less powerful C7s that you can actually buy here in the UK, so well worth its place on this list. Taking third on this list with 485 points is a substitute for the £175,000 Aston Martin DB11 AMR. This monster puts out 630 brake horsepower from its 5.2 litre twin turbocharged V12 engine, taking it from 0 to 60 in just 3.6 seconds. Of course, there are some non-AMR versions that are somewhat cheaper, and you can get your hands on a second-hand DB11 for a minimum of around £106,000 with very low mileage. But if we're talking top of the range, then the AMR reigns champion. It combines the incredible performance you would expect from an Aston Martin racing with the luxury interior and features one might expect from any other Aston Martin, and it looks good doing it in my opinion. The only sad thing is that it hasn't yet been used in a Bond film at the time of making this video, though it is somewhat reminiscent of the DB10 used in Spectre. If you haven't got bags of cash sitting there waiting to be thrown at this AMR beast, then maybe you could consider substituting it for another Aston Martin, the cheapest one available in fact, the DB7, which may only be similar in terms of the badge and the fact that it hasn't been used in a Bond film, though that applies to many cars. The main point is it's still an Aston Martin, even if it was originally built as an evolution of the Jaguar XJS platform while Ford owned Aston Martin. It has a 3.2 litre supercharged inline-6 that puts out 335 brake horsepower, taking it from 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, which is not bad for a Grand Tourer of its age, considering the last one left the production line in 2004. The idea behind the Aston Martin XJS was basically to save the company. It was clear that they needed to increase production and sales in order to survive, and the best way to do that was to make a car that could suit a lower price point. That's why so many parts from Jaguar were used to save money, and also why it's one of the very few Aston Martins to have a steel chassis, rather than the aluminium used for most Aston Martins before and after. For your 20 grand you can just about pick up one of these company saving Jaguar DB7s with around 65 to 75,000 miles on the clock, which makes it a nice entry level into the Aston Martin brand. Funny that even the Signet is more expensive than the DB7, which is basically a Toyota IQ for the bourgeoisie. In terms of reliability, the older ones actually come out on top in areas like rust proofing. However, engine and gearbox cooling systems are renowned for leaking, as with timing chain tensioners, which will have a good go at kamikazing the whole engine. Other issues include the exhaust manifold cracking, gear change issues caused by the wiring harness, bushes that wear too quickly, and the aircon failing, which can cost a lot to fix as the whole dashboard may have to be removed. I would highly recommend buying one of these with an Aston pre-owned vehicle warranty that covers classics. You don't want one of these to go wrong, as parts are quite expensive. Either way, it's nothing close to the DB11 in reality, but for a slice of the brand synonymous with Bond and the ability ability to join the same owners club as the landed gentry driving around in DB11s, the DB7 offers a great, if unreliable, package. Just make sure there are no Jaguar badges on it. On to the top 2 now, and in second place with 444 points is a substitute for one of my personal favourite cars in existence right now, the Lotus Exige S3 430 Cup. This track car for the road or vice versa has a supercharged 3.5 litre V6 out of a Toyota Camry, which takes it from 0 to 60 in just 3.2 seconds and puts out 430 brake horsepower. It is made specifically to crush a track and I absolutely love it. If I could have any sports car right now, this would be it, despite its lack of usability in day-to-day life. However, it starts at £120,000 brand new, which is a slight issue for most of our wallets, so might have to look for something slightly cheaper. That's where the Series 2 Lotus Elise 111S comes in with its 1.8 litre inline-4 engine with VVC from Rover that puts out 156 brake horsepower, taking it from 0 to 60 in a respectable 4.9 seconds. You can pick one up for around £13,000 at a bare minimum with a few more miles on the clock, or for your 20 grand you'll get a 2005 example with around 25 to 30,000 miles on it. The 111S was made by Lotus to appeal to a wider market. The Norfolk-based firm is renowned for providing basic cars that have incredible handling but limited comforts for inhabitants. When the 111S came out, it was practically luxury by Lotus standards at the time, with central locking, power windows, a wide choice of fabrics and trims on the interior, additional soundproofing, carpets, and for the first time ever in a Lotus, optional air conditioning. In your average Lotus at the time, and even somewhat today, these features would just be considered unnecessary weight, so wouldn't be included. This appeared to be partially an attempt by Lotus to take the fight back to the Vauxhall VX220 Turbo in the lightweight two-seater sports car class, which is somewhat cheaper. The best part is, according to reviews, these features didn't really affect the general principle of the car, as it retained its incredible handling and enjoyable ride. In terms of reliability, you Lotus lovers out there will be pleased to hear that the Elise S2 is such a simple car, there isn't very much that goes wrong with it too often. As it's so light, it doesn't put very much strain on the engine, so though head gaskets have been known to go every so often, it's rare. Do be aware that some owners may not look after them very well, as some have had issues from being revved while cold. Ensure you service the cam belt once every 4 years or 36,000 miles as well to decrease the likelihood of a full engine rebuild. Overall though, from what I can see being said on owners forums and by mechanics, it's a pretty solid car. So yes, it isn't quite as savage and rugged as the S3 Exige, but the 111S Elise is a great option for those that haven't got 120 grand to spare. I can certainly imagine owning an Elise at some point in the not too distant future, but would likely take one step further and save for a Series 3. Finally, taking the top spot with 376 points is a substitute for the Mark II Audi R8 V10 Plus. This Quattro put the "is the R8 a sports car or supercar" debate to rest with its 5.2 litre V10 engine that puts out 601 brake horsepower, taking it from 0 to 60 in just 3.1 seconds. It looks massively more aggressive than the original R8, and yet it somehow offers the entry level into supercar ownership given its slightly lower price than other new supercars, £140,000. That's only £20,000 more than the Lotus Exige I was just going on about before, which is pretty insane. I say only 20k like I have that money to spend. Obviously that's not the case, I drive a 17-year-old Polo. But if you're slightly wealthier than I and could maybe stomach putting £20,000 on something that might give you a fraction of the enjoyment an R8 might bring, then you could consider going for the 8J Audi TT RS, as with the V10 Plus, it's the top of the range, boasting the turbocharged 2.5 litre inline-5 that puts out 335 brake horsepower and takes it from 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds, the quickest substitute car on this list. This was the first RS variant of a TT, and hosts all the features you might expect from an RS. It has a short shift, close ratio 6-speed manual transmission, and numerous additional bits of tech in the prop shaft and diff to support the 450 Nm of torque this beast puts out. It has its own specific RS exterior styling, which I think is very aggressive, which includes a fixed rear wing. You could actually option the standard retractable wing, but this wing pretty much signals the fact that you have an RS to those less aware of cars, so not sure why I'd go for that option personally. The 7-speed DSG Auto that became available in 2010 is actually the quicker of the two, boasting a 4.2 second 0 to 60, but I say back yourself and go for the manual as it will just be more fun, in my opinion. The price of the TTRS has been dipping nicely recently, with high mileage examples going for around £15,000. 20 grand will get you a 2010 manual with around 50 to 60,000 miles on the clock in decent condition. This has to be a consideration for anyone looking for comfort and performance, and a little bit of rarity. Of course, TTs are pretty common, but the TTRS is a different beast. To make life even better, reviews and forums suggest the engine is one of the most bulletproof of any high-performance sports car and has an equally strong transmission mated to it. Watch out for poor gear synchros though from people that aren't sparing with the box. This is a rare but potential issue. Overall, you can pretty much expect to do well with the TTRS in terms of reliability, and even the fuel economy isn't that bad compared with other models in the RS lineup, at 31 miles per gallon on average when driven comfortably. Would I have one? Absolutely. Would I prefer an R8? Absolutely. But it doesn't take away from the fact that this really does offer an amazing package for less than 20 grand, and it well deserves a top place on this list. So to recap, I've given you my take on the top 5 cheap substitutes for expensive cars that you can buy for under £20,000. Comment down below if you'd have included any other substitute pairings in this video, or just comment down below if you think that one of my cars should have been paired with a different car. Simple. But if you enjoyed the video, remember to like and subscribe for more weekly car content. Go follow me on Instagram to help out with the growth over there. And as always, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
Listen.